My name's Harriet. I hack your AI so the bad guys can't. Hello. So, in a few of my vlogs recently, and in general, I guess, I've been asked. Actually, I'm gonna close my window. I don't know if you can hear all the birds outside. I'm just sitting next to my balcony. The birds are very noisy. Okay, let's start again. Hello. I've had a few questions recently, both online and in person, I guess, about the nerd tattoos that I have on my arm. Hang on, maybe I need to flex. Okay. So I do actually have two physics equations tattooed on my arm, and they're sort of subtle, like they're not obvious. And so a lot of the time I think people just don't really notice them, but every so often they do, and I always get questions about it. So I thought it might be really cool to explain, first of all, what they are and why I decided to get them. They are the only tattoos I have. I never really, I don't know, when I was younger, I never thought I would be the kind of person to get tattoos. And then I really thought about it and I was like, what does it mean to be the kind of person that gets a tattoo versus the kind of person that doesn't, you know? And if I want a tattoo, why would that offend someone else in the world? That said, I felt a lot of pressure. My mum is not into tattoos at all. So actually, it was like a year after I got the first one before I told her. So I got the first tattoo, which was this one. So this is Einstein's theory of special relativity, or E equals mc squared, and quite a lot of people have heard that one before and probably know a little bit about what it is. But actually, I got it in 2019 when I guess I was going through quite a period of change in my life. So I haven't discussed it a lot on my channel already, but basically I worked my consulting job for 3 years between 2016 and 2018, and it was great in many ways. It was the sort of job that had lots of ups and downs, and the ups were fantastic. I loved my colleagues. I loved the opportunities to learn and the things that I got exposure to, and the downs were very much, it was the kind of job that just didn't sit with who I was as a personality, I've always hated 9 to 5 jobs, like desk jobs. I just really struggle sitting at desks all day. And there were other things about the job I disliked as well anyway. But I got to the end of 2018 and I just didn't really know what I was meant to do. And there were so many things that I'd always wanted to do. And one of them was to work in physics, because my bachelor degree was in physics and bioanthropology. And when I finished university, basically, bioanthropology is quite difficult to get employed and there's not a lot of career progression opportunities, which is important to me. And physics, I never specialized enough in a specific area that it would have been easy to get a job, especially because I didn't do an honors year. Like if I'd done an honors year in physics, that would have helped a lot. But I'd always loved physics. I always refer to physics as my first love. I just found the idea of thinking about the universe and our place in it, and how math is so beautiful and describes all this complexity, but you're able to write it as a few numbers and letters in an equation. I always loved that. I was really passionate about it. And so I decided that I really wanted to work in physics. So I quit my consulting job at the end of 2018, and basically what I did was I reached out to just any professor at a university who was in my city, and I was living in Sydney at the time. I just cold emailed a bunch of professors who were doing work that I was interested in and said, hi, I will work with you for free. I would just love the opportunity to work with you and learn and work on something that I think is interesting and important. And one of them replied and said, yeah, let's do it. And it was fantastic. And honestly, because I guess it was like an unpaid internship style thing. I don't know. They just let me sit at a desk and gave me things to do. And in the end, I did get paid for some work because a lot of the work I'd done before was data analysis, and the department needed some data analysis and database management work done, which I'd done before. So I ended up getting paid for that. But it was really nice not having to have the pressure of it being a job, like the physics aspect of that work I was doing, because I just felt so free to explore and to read and to write about things that I was interested in. And, you know, the professor didn't have too much pressure to make sure I was doing something useful as well. Even though it was, like, the kind of work I was doing was in gravitational astrophysics and basically mapping dead stars in the Milky Way galaxy. So living stars are stars that emit light, and we know where most of those are because we can see them and we've mapped them in the universe, or at least, you know, the ones that we can see. However, the dead stars, you know, the ones that have reached the end of their lives and don't give off visible light anymore, things like white dwarfs, neutron stars, and black holes, a lot of the time we don't know where they are. And so that's the kind of work I was doing. I was working on modeling where these stars might be moving. And so that was really fun, and I really loved it. But I'd also always had this itch to move overseas. So I was there for about 6 months, and then I decided to move overseas. And it was just a period of, I literally moved with my suitcase to the UK. I got the youth mobility visa. I did a sort of backpacking trip, which is where I met one of my best friends now. And we got to the end of this trip. I didn't know what my life was going to have. I didn't have a job lined up. I just knew I was going to arrive in London at the end of my month backpacking Europe and start looking for a job in God knows what. And so while I was on that trip, I was reading this book about Einstein, and I loved it because of the physics element, obviously. Like, a lot of the book described how he came to develop his theories and what they meant in a broader perspective. And Einstein was a really interesting person. Like, he was born in the German Empire, but was Jewish, so he really struggled trying to find somewhere that was safe for him, but also somewhere where he could work on his research. And he was also the kind of person that wasn't, you know, he was obviously very smart and very gifted, but it's not like he was seen as a child genius or anything. Like, he had to work really hard to get to where he was and to get to the point where he was able to develop important theories. And so I thought his story was really inspirational, and I decided to get E=mc² tattooed on my arm for that reason. I felt like it had a lot of, like, significance from a personal perspective, the perspective of what I'm passionate about, and the perspective of the kind of person that I would, you know, in some small part, like to try and emulate. So that's the first one. So that was 2019. And unfortunately, right after that, COVID happened. And it was really unfortunate because I didn't actually end up getting a job in London like I assumed I would, but I got a job in New York because someone reached out to me on LinkedIn, like literally as I started my backpacking trip. We did a series of interviews as I was in different, like, hostels around Europe. And then as I arrived in London, I got the job offer for New York, and it was amazing and so exciting. And I'd lived briefly in the United States before when I did a semester as part of my master's at Stanford University, and I was there for 3 months living in, you know, at Stanford. And it, like, I've always loved the United States. It's not perfect, nowhere is perfect, but I've just loved that energy. And so I was thrilled to be moving to New York. And I was there for, I guess, almost a year, and then COVID started and I had to come home. And it was disappointing, but also, you know, life leads you in different directions and you don't know what the purpose of it is, or if there is a purpose at all, but you have to just take the cards you're dealt and make the most of it. So I had to move back in with my parents for a little while, which was depressing, but also actually lovely. We had a great time. It was a lot of fun. But that entire time, because I arrived home and it was winter in Australia, and so I was wearing, like, long sleeve tops the entire time, and Mum never saw the tattoo. And so finally, after, gosh, maybe 4 or 5 months of this, and I was about to move into my own place, and I realized I'm not technically lying, but how long is this going to go on before she realizes? So I took her, I was like, Mum, I have to tell you something. I think you should sit down for this. And she was like, are you pregnant? And I was like, no, I have a tattoo. And she was like, oh! But actually, in her defense, she handled it really well, and now she makes a conscious effort to not, you know, she's never said anything negative about it. So I really appreciate that, Mum. But yeah, it was, it was a long time before she knew about it. But therefore, I was a little bit less scared of her reaction when I decided to get the second tattoo. And so the second tattoo is one that people often don't recognize, and they wouldn't necessarily, I wouldn't expect them to. Hang on, I need to flex more. There we go. It's the Schrödinger equation. So some people have probably heard of Schrödinger because of Schrödinger's cat. And Schrödinger's cat is basically like an allegory in the quantum physics world. And I am going to refer to some notes actually, because I don't want to say the wrong thing on the internet. It's a thought experiment devised by Schrödinger, the man who came up with the theory. It's meant to illustrate a paradox in quantum mechanics. So paradox meaning that sort of two things could exist at the same time and we don't know what it means or how. And so it's a scenario where a cat is placed in a seal box with a radioactive atom, a Geiger counter, so that's how you can count like the radioactivity in a particular region. So like if you go to a nuclear facility, you take a Geiger counter and it goes like if it's very radioactive. In the box there's also a hammer and a vial of poison. And so the experiment is set up so that the Geiger counter detects radiation, indicating the radioactive atom has decayed. The hammer will break the vial, releasing the poison and killing the cat. I kind of hate this analogy. Like, why do they have to kill a cat? It just seems so unnecessary. But I guess the point of, life and death being polar opposites is what they're trying to get across. But still, I think there must be a more ethical way of getting this allegory. Anyway, so, according to quantum mechanics, until the box is opened and the system is observed, the radioactive atom is in superposition of decayed and undecayed states. Consequently, the cat is considered to be simultaneously alive and dead, illustrating the peculiarities of quantum superposition and the problem of measurement in quantum mechanics. So what on earth does that mean? So basically, what's so fascinating about quantum mechanics, and the reason why I wanted to get a quantum-related tattoo as my next one, was because basically the whole point of quantum mechanics is that instead of imagining the world as something that, is or isn't, you have a particle that's here or a particle that's there. It says that everything is actually like a probability distribution. Like the most likely place for a particle in a particular situation might be here, but there's a small chance that it could be here. And the thing that determines whether it is here or there is whether we observe it or not. One of the key equations in quantum is one that relates position and momentum. And it says that if you know an atom's position, you can't know its momentum, and vice versa. And in quantum mechanics, quantum particles, so we might be familiar with, protons, neutrons, and electrons, but they're actually made up of, or at least protons and neutrons are actually made up of even smaller quantum particles, things like leptons and quarks, and they have weird names like that. And these quantum particles live in states of superposition, dictated by all kinds of formula. And without really needing to get into the mathematics of it, I just think the point of it is that it's so beautiful that whatever we see around us isn't necessarily true. And us puny humans have been able to find a way to sort of pick apart what we see versus what reality is, or at least a certain perception or idea of what true reality is. And I don't know, I think there's all kinds of philosophical things in there as well. Anything that comes down to like weird mathematical functions in quantum, you definitely, you can't help but get a bit philosophical, because what does it mean? How crazy is this world we live in? We think about the universe we're in and the big planets and those distances and the scale of us, and that's kind of amazing. And that's, the realm that Einstein was thinking in. But then we get down to the quantum level and it's just as weird, if not weirder. And so I think that's amazing. And that's why I decided to get the Schrödinger equation. There's lots of different equations that I could have picked for both of these, actually. So here, this is the equation for special relativity. There's also general relativity. So special relativity is basically the first theory that Einstein came up with, where he doesn't take gravitation into account. It's sort of a limited version of the theory. that relates energy and mass and says that they are basically related. And by related, I mean that energy and mass are what's referred to as transmutable. So they're transferable. You can transfer energy into mass and vice versa. And what that means is all sorts of crazy phenomena become possible. Things like time dilation, where if you're moving at a very high speed, time slows down, which is something we can observe by putting clocks on spaceships and comparing the time on a spaceship compared to the time on Earth. Like, all this stuff is real, crazy things. And I decided to pick the simplified one versus the general equations. The general equations are a bit different, but only because they extend the theory by incorporating gravity. So they incorporate Newton's laws of motion as well. And with Schrodinger's equations, for example, you know, like, I have to live with these tattoos on my arm for the rest of my life, right? They had to be somewhat aesthetic. And I did want something that included some of these, like, particularly cool symbols. This is a Hamiltonian. This is psi. Hamiltonian psi. We've got some cool, like, we've got the imaginary number, Planck's constant. So, I mean, it had to look kind of cool as well, right? There are other ones I could have picked, but, you know, it's my arm. Am I ready for the next tattoo? I don't know. I think both of these came at moments in my life where I underwent periods of change. Am I ready for that yet? I think I need to hit some sort of milestones first. I don't know. I always imagine that maybe the next tattoo would be something related to my company. Like, if I reached some significant milestone in my company, but then there's something nice about the idea of physics equations, for the most part, being permanent. And I don't want to get too attached to something that might be impermanent as much as I love it. Because we are talking about the rest of my life. I mean, I guess you can remove tattoos, but you don't want to go in with that intention, right? So there we go. That's the story behind my nerd tattoos. If you have nerd tattoos, I would love to hear your stories. Whenever I Google online, like when I was getting inspiration for these ones, inspiration in terms of, like, were there any little symbols I wanted to have done as well, or like what kind of font style should I look at? I did see other physics and math equations, so I know people out there have them. But when I went to get the Schrodinger equation one done, for example, I was on a trip at the Gold Coast in Australia. It happened to be the wedding weekend of my friend, but long story short, I booked the tattoo first and then she booked her wedding later, so that was a coincidence. But I was at the Gold Coast. It's very trendy, you know. I'm from Canberra. I'm kind of like, I'm a nerd. Gold Coast is all very, like, everyone was very tan and gorgeous, and I walked into this tattoo studio and they were like, so you're here for this random collection of letters and numbers? And I was like, it's the Schrodinger equation, you know, like pushing up my glasses kind of thing. So please help me feel less alone. Let me know if you've had a tattoo like this as well, or if you know someone like it, or yeah, help me think of what tattoo I should get next. Which nerd equation should I next pick? It sort of has to be on a similar theme though. So I hope you found this interesting, and maybe inspiration if you've been thinking about it for a long time, and just want to, you know, forge your own path and pick a really unusual tattoo as well. And if you're not into tattoos, then live vicariously through me. Don't feel pressured to do something you don't want to do. But anyway, thank you for joining. Please it really helps my channel. Please subscribe if you want to see more from me, and yeah, comment down below. I really want to know your thoughts. So bye.